The world of Mustafar was once a green planet full of life, but after continuous battles between the Jedi and the Sith, the stresses that were inflicted on the planet's core turned the world into a volcanic hell. The two neighbouring gas giants of Lefrani and Jestafed were moved from their usual orbits by a dark side weapon, and as their new orbit ripped Mustafar to its core, the surface was exposed to the lava beneath it. Though life on the surface was dramatically reduced, the world was not forgotten to the Sith, and several millennia after the world was torn apart, the planet would play host to a galaxy-defining duel. At the end of the Clone War, Obi-Wan Kenobi had been one of the few Jedi to survive Order 66, and after witnessing the massacre at Coruscant, he was dispatched by Grandmaster Yoda to find his fallen apprentice Anakin Skywalker. Even as Obi-Wan watched the security recordings of Anakin becoming Darth Vader, he knew that the cause of Anakin's fall was related to Padme Amidala. Taking a DC-0052 speeder to the apartment of the Senator, Obi-Wan was quick to ask C3PO if Anakin had visited, and the protocol droid feared for his life at Obi-Wan's reaction at hearing of a Jedi rebellion. When the distressed Senator emerged, she denied knowledge of Anakin's location, and though Obi-Wan told her of Anakin killing the younglings, she refused to help him hunt down Anakin. After being dismissed from the building, Obi-Wan seemed to have disappeared, but the Jedi Master was actually waiting beneath Amidala's Naboo starskiff. In a fateful decision, Obi-Wan jumped aboard the ship and hid in a stowaway, just as Padme and C3PO left for Mustafar. But what if Obi-Wan never left for Mustafar? What would happen to Vader? Would Padme and her children survive? As Padme Amidala resumed her frantic walk across the apartment, Obi-Wan was somewhat obscured from this view by C3PO, and he knew that this path was closed. Piloting his airspeeder from the veranda, he saw the glint of Padme's ship on the platform below, and perhaps this was his final hope. The Jedi Master swooped down to look for a suitable landing zone, but when he finally spotted a space near another apartment, he saw a group of clones leaving the building and monitoring the area. Obi-Wan was forced to turn away again, and now desperate to land, he opted for the transparent steel roof of an apartment. Wasting no time and jumping out of his ship, he used forced enhanced dashes and jumps to move towards the Naboo starskiff, but just as he arrived on the platform, he looked in despair as the ship left for its destination. Just like his duel with Maul on Naboo, he was not quite fast enough. Obi-Wan had now failed Yoda's mission, but hearing the footsteps of clones heading his way, he made a return for his ship. Once he was in the air, the Jedi Master was now secure in his belief that he could not find Anakin, so despite his earlier doubts, he moved to find and help Grandmaster Yoda. Making his landing on one of the empty delegate platforms, Obi-Wan could hear the cackles of the Emperor, but he could also feel the light side from Yoda fighting for its life. Once he found his way to one of the entrances to the main Senate chamber, Obi-Wan saw the ongoing duel with his eyes, and the speed of the combatants far surpassed anything he had seen. He had thought Grievous had been twirling his blades quickly, but Palpatine and Yoda were just specks of green and red. Yoda had warned him that he would die quickly at the hands of Sidious, and now he realised he was correct, but seeing Sidious gave him an idea. Having witnessed the recordings of the Jedi Temple, Obi-Wan wanted to find its source, and though it pained him to do so, he thought he could watch Sidious's orders to Vader and possibly discover its location. As the ferocious duel receded into the background, the Jedi were able to navigate between the sub-levels, and as the duel moved onto the podium, Obi-Wan found himself in a suite beneath the action. With Mas Amedda confident of victory, the Jagrina retreated to prepare a victory speech in front of the Jedi Temple, and this left Obi-Wan free to access the office. But as he looked for a way to trace Palpatine's transmissions, the console started to flash with an incoming transmission from Mustafar. Obi-Wan knew that this is where Vader was located, but with Palpatine preoccupied, he had to think fast, and force pulling the arm of the closest royal guard, he quickly put on the disguise before accepting the transmission. Whilst Obi-Wan had endured a chaotic journey after leaving Padme's apartment, Padme and C3PO travelled to the world of Mustafar, and after Vader had slaughtered the Separatist Council in their hideout, the Senator ran to greet Vader. As he declared himself to be more powerful than the Chancellor, Padme was struggling to believe what Anakin had turned into and slowly backed away. Now fearing the repercussions, Vader declared that if she was to move any further, she would become his enemy, and worried for the life of her children, she decided to follow Vader for now. Such was the overconfidence of the Sith apprentice, He believed that Padme had sealed her allegiance to his cause, and now he wanted to defeat the Emperor. Returning to the Separatist war room, Vader activated the holo projector, but expecting to see his master delivering his next mission, he is met by the red figure of a royal guard. Knowing the guards were sworn to silence, Vader told the disguised guard that his mission was complete, and now he would be returning to Coruscant. Obi-Wan rapidly ended the transmission, and removing his disguise, he switched the code to that of Padme Amidala. After Vader returned to the war room, Padme realised this would be her last chance to change her mind, and glancing at Vader running away from her, she was poked in the leg by R2-D2, and with the astromech also knowing what his master was up to, they walked away to the Naboo starskiff. Thanks to the extended range on her modified ship, she soon received a transmission from Obi-Wan Kenobi, and she told him what had happened on Mustafar and her plans to move away from Coruscant, to a location where she could safely deliver her children. As Obi-Wan was about to ask for the destination, he saw the cloak of Yoda floating towards him, and instinctively, he reached out to cushion it from falling. As he did so, the small green figure of Yoda soon followed, and Obi-Wan replicated the feat, and they now stared at the roof of the Senate chamber. Though the repulsor pods, which had previously housed senators, were now obscuring their view of Palpatine, the echoes of his maniacal laughter were enough to confirm their defeat. When Obi-Wan told Yoda that Anakin was returning to Coruscant, Yoda realised that they had failed their last attempt to defeat the Sith, but Obi-Wan pointed to the potential of Padme's children. With the Coruscant guard on the prowl, the two Jedi scrambled through a light well in one of the maintenance shafts, and are taken to safety by Bail Organa. Once they convened on the Tantive IV, the Jedi moved to Naboo, where Padme had escaped to after an encounter with Vader on Mustafar, but when they left hyperspace, they were shocked to find the Empire was already there and setting up a blockade. Though the Tantive IV was not designed for combat, Obi-Wan and Yoda utilised the Station Delta 7 Jedi interceptors, and during their descent, Obi-Wan sensed the ominous signature of his old apprentice. To avoid the detection of the Empire, the Jedi buried themselves in a cave adjacent to the Solu River before instructing their astromechs to scan for a medical centre. As the droids rotated their rangefinders, the Jedi noticed something disturbing, and on the top of the opposing hill, a military garrison was marching through Theed, shooting anyone who dared to show a flicker of resistance. Their Jedi instincts were twitching to save the people of Naboo, but their greater mission was to protect Padme and her children, so after the droids had discovered her skiff in the Theed Palace, the Jedi ascended to the upper planes. Once constructed to house the monarchs of Naboo, the beginning of the Empire saw the monarchy become symbolic, rather than holding any real power, and the Jedi could see signs of Imperial dignitaries around the palace front, led by former Naboo Security Force Captain Panaka. Though the main entrance was covered, Obi-Wan knew from his time scouting the palace as a Padawan that there were multiple entrances, and one was the palace starport located near the power generator. Evading the Imperial presence, the two Jedi entered the starport through a hidden entrance, and rushed through the largely vacant palace to be greeted by R2-D2. The astromech guides the Jedi to a medical area, where Padme had already given birth to Luke and Leia, and Obi-Wan could see the truth of Anakin's fall within Padme's eyes. As the medical droid was about to perform a diagnostic, a chain of explosions rocked the palace, and the medical ward was split into two. The Jedi and their children were divided from Padme, having been blasted onto a ledge of the cliffs adjoining the palace, and had used the Force to save the children and the droids. The path back up was now blocked by the 501st Legion led by Vader, who had sent a false transmission to Palpatine so he could find Padme, and had been ordering his troops to secure the capital, but was now desperately looking for the Senator. The Sith saw her still attached to her bed, several meters from her original place, and when she saw the Sith, her eyelids contracted and Vader let out a scream of despair. Ordering for a medical droid and a clone medic, he valiantly used the Force to transfer Force energy into Padme, maintaining her pulse until she could be moved to a Bacta tank. Vader proved to himself and the Jedi that he needed these new powers to save Padme, but lifting the entire clone legion into the air, he punished them for their lack of control, as they nearly killed Padme through their reckless explosions. Turning to face the half-broken medical droid, its neck started to tighten when it hesitated to reveal the status of the children, and Vader ripped it to shreds. As Vader's starfighter led the gasping 501st Legion off of the planet with Padme, Obi-Wan and Yoda were still perched on the side of the cliff face, and had just used a lot of energy to conceal their signatures in the Force. Though they were saddened by the capture of Padme, They had the twins, who they hoped would redeem the Jedi. Once the Imperial presence had settled on Naboo, the Jedi were quick to leave the planet and convene on the Tantive IV, but matters were more difficult for Darth Vader. The Sith was furious that the children had either gone missing or were killed, and with Padme's condition still critical, he had to figure out how he could protect her. Returning to Coruscant, the Sith was met by his master at the cruiser staging area, and immediately he was hoisted into the air. In front of his own clone troopers and many of Coruscant's civilians, who had remained after Mas Amedda's speech, Vader was humiliated for his weakness of pursuing Padme Amidala, and for lying about his destination. As the Sith writhed on the floor in agony, Sidious ordered for Padme to be moved into the carbonite freezing chamber, which had once belonged to the Jedi. As Vader clambered from the floor, Sidious sneered at Vader and asked him if he now knew where his place belonged amongst the hierarchy. Expected to be met with a bow, the Sith Lord was not prepared for a ground-shaking force shockwave, which pushed anyone in their vicinity into a wall. Sidious cackled after his body made impact with a pillar, and allowing the pain to embrace him, he was secretly delighted by the potential of Vader, but he could not let this continue. Igniting his lightsaber, which he had retrieved after his duel with Yoda, the Sith Lord approached his apprentice, and just as he wanted, he was met by a blue blade. The newfound power generated through Vader's embracing of the dark side had made the former Jedi Knight's techniques sloppy and inefficient, and Sidious toyed with Vader until they reached the footsteps of the Jedi Temple. Disarming his apprentice with ease, he ordered his apprentice to assert his allegiance to him and the Sith, and with the help of the Force, he forced Vader to his knees. Like he had done in his office, Vader, albeit reluctantly, pledged to the teachings of the Sith, and was then told to find a new lightsaber crystal. Though Sidious had succeeded in subduing his wayward apprentice, the public display of violence did no favours to the Emperor, and as word spread across the galaxy of the duel, some were doubting the integrity of his speech after the alleged assassination attempt of the Jedi. The duel between the Sith soon reached the ears of Bail Organa and the Jedi, and even though the rebellion was in its infancy, he used his small network of agents to encourage rebellious activity. Some of the control which Sidious had worked to establish was under threat, and after Vader had successfully bled his lightsaber crystal, he was dispatched to deal with all the insurgents. The deployment of Vader was not a surprise for Organa or the Jedi, and now they wanted to lure Palpatine away from his throne to try to rescue Padme Amidala. With the publicity of Palpatine and Vader's duel, Organa had broken down the footage and he'd identified an elongated casket-like object being transported off of Vader's Star Destroyer, but there was no precise location for the Senator. The Alderaanians still had contacts on Coruscant, many of whom were serving in the largely powerless Imperial Senate, and smuggling R2-D2 aboard a freighter. The astromech was tasked with communicating Organa's mission. Since R2 units were common across the galaxy, R2-D2 was easily able to bypass the Titan border patrols, but the rest of Coruscant posed a different challenge. The transition from the Republic to Imperial rule had imposed a near lockdown on the newly named Imperial Center, and the equally newly formed Imperial Security Bureau were deploying agents to catch any dissidents. Even for an astromech as experienced as R2-D2, it takes several hours of patience and learning the patterns of the patrol's movements before reaching the secret coordinates. The location was a hideout hidden in the Federal District, and its sole occupant was former Clone Commander Rex. In the aftermath of Order 66, Rex had thought that his network of rebellious clone troopers was a secret, but with the capture of Padme, Organa dispatched his agents to scout Coruscant. Since Rex had begun his work under Organa, he not only had helped recruit veteran clone troopers, but also senators who had been against Palpatine at the end of the war. Having reunited with R2-D2, Rex feared to ask for the fate of General Skywalker, but soon he would have to confront this fear as they aimed to rescue Padme. His alliance with the senators proved to be useful as he acquired a rare prototype spy droid that had once spied on the Republic, and he recalibrated its programming to serve under his control. Combining the spy droid with R2-D2, the astromech first used his scanners to detect life forms, and after several days of scouting, Rex was able to examine the footage to find a life form hidden in the Jedi Temple. Though the exterior of the temple was heavily fortified, with the Coruscant Guard and Coruscant Security Force in particular, the inside was a mix of Imperial agents, tasked with removing Jedi artifacts. Having cleared the upper levels, Rex saw that the security was less in the towers, but any access seemed impossible. With the temple's complex isolated from other buildings in the Federal District, any kind of ascension cable was out of the question, so Rex decided to be more direct. After monitoring the air traffic which surrounded the area, the former clone switched his armour for that of the Coruscant Guard, which he had obtained from a drunken clone in the Entertainment District. Joining one of the patrols that perused the district, Rex managed to board a LAAT gunship previously used by the clone shock troopers, and thanks to the unique layout of the ship, the spoked cockpit was separated from the troop bay. The clone used all of his stealth to stun all of the other guards, and as the pilot rose to the level of the towers, Rex leapt out of the troop bay. With the aid of a grappling hook, Rex latched onto the ledge of a tower, and it happened to be the one formerly occupied by the Jedi Council. As it was one of the first areas to be searched, the chamber was currently empty, and Rex leapt through the partially repaired window. On the ground, the silhouette of Rex going through the window was noticed by the actual Coruscant Guard, and with the stunned troopers in the gunship, Rex was being hunted. Before they could catch him, Rex was using a holographic map to guide his path to the lower levels, but as he reached the older part of the building, the agents were now joining the search. As had been the case in the Clone War, the chamber was located in one of the lower level hangars, and he found the area to be unguarded. Scanning the shadows for any droids, he tore the heads off of 2 Imperial police droids, using his experience of fighting BX series commando droids, and he moved to free the frozen Padme. Though she had only been in hibernation for several weeks, the exhaustion from giving birth worsened the effects of hibernation sickness, and she was struggling to stay on her feet. Rex's escape was now hindered by the speed of Padme, and inevitably he encountered the Coruscant Guard. The former clone calmly told them that he was moving the prisoner to a more secure location, and though the guards bore this excuse, they demanded to follow Rex to the Judicial Detention Center. This was far from the original plan, but if he had learned anything from serving under General Skywalker, it was that most plans were subject to improvisation. As Rex and the guards passed through a hidden entrance, he soon saw that they were about to board an airspeeder, rather than the police gunship. Now seated at the back of the airspeeder, Rex subtly tilted the rear-mounted repulsor lift engines, and the airspeeder responded by violently moving into air traffic, and in the chaos, Rex leapt out of the speeder with Padme, and onto another. Though initially successful, the airspeeder was shot by a gunship, and the smoking ship tumbled to a platform. Rex and Padme were now divided, with Rex surrounded by the real Coruscant Guard, but Padme, who could now move, managed to sneak through to a cantina. Leaving through the rear entrance, she was now in the dark alleyways, but this was the better option with the troopers on her tail, and having had some journeys in these parts, she knew where she could find transport. Just as she was about to reach a secret hangar, she heard a voice from a side passage. Padme recognised the voice, and it belonged to Senator Pamela of Taris, so she decided to enter a secret hideout, used by the senators opposing Palpatine. Pamela had been working as one of the agents for Organa's network, and had garnered support from the likes of Senator Chuchi, so she offered to lend Padme one of her ships, while she helped to find Rex. As it happened, the former clone captain had continued to act like he was part of the Coruscant Guard, but his erratic behaviour, both in entering the Jedi Temple alone and jumping out of a moving speeder, had earned him a trip to the newly named Imperial Inspectorate. Rather than going to the office of Vice Admiral Rampart, Rex is taken to the clone barracks by none other than Fox, and Rex had not forgotten about Fox's roles in both the capture of Ahsoka and the loss of Fives. Once they were isolated, Rex wasted no time in disabling the comlink on Fox's wrist, then smashed his head into the wall to knock him out, before dragging him into one of the medical bays. As his knowledge of the base surpassed anyone in existence, Rex found a ventilation shaft and crawled across to the outside world, whilst the others were examining Fox. Once Rampart was alluded to this intruder, he initiated a full lockdown on the headquarters, but Rex also knew the lockdown procedure, and he found his way to the outside world. Now in the Federal District, Rex hears the familiar beeps of R2-D2, who had first found Senator Pamlo, then was diverted to Rex. Together they could summon the Martez sisters, whom Rex had recruited after Order 66, and leave behind a furious Admiral Rampart, who was left to face the punishment of his superiors. But in the shadows, there was one former clone who knew the identity of the runaway, and that was Cody. The trooper formerly known as CC-2224 had known from both the marks on Fox and the route of the escape that the escapee was Rex. Though he now served the Empire, Cody had begun to question the goals of the regime, and he wondered what Rex was trying to achieve. As the troopers investigated what had happened to Fox, all of their comlinks flashed into life and they were being requested to convene in the main hangar. Commander Cody knew this was a coded message for punishment, so taking one last look at Fox, he walked away. The disappearance of Cody went largely unnoticed, as the other troopers were tending to their wounds with their punishment, and the former clone commander began to trudge through Coruscant, searching for a purpose without the orders of a soldier. The clone soon found himself in a bar, and as he sampled the notorious Kowakian rum, something caught his eye on the holoscreen. The Empire had formulated a list of wanted fugitives, and this was something Cody had not paid much attention to, but his weary eyes lit up when he heard the name Obi-Wan Kenobi. The clone was convinced that Obi-Wan had died on Utapau, having personally issued the order for him to be blasted into the chasm, but this news revitalized Cody to find his old general. After leaving the bar, Cody decided to first find Rex, as he knew the Jedi Master would have covered all of his tracks, and he headed for the Imperial Senate building. Cody had known that Rex had been trying to rescue Padme Amidala thanks to Palpatine's public humiliation of Vader, and now he was searching for the one senator he hoped would help him. In the aftermath of the senatorial arrests, Chandrilan Senator Mon Mothma had openly declared her support to the Empire, but Cody knew she was opposing the Emperor from her movement at the end of the war. So it was an initially suspicious Mon Mothma who allowed Cody into her office after his weapons were relinquished, and hearing of his defection, she diverted him to the world of Seleucami. When Cody boarded an outdated new class attack shuttle, he remembered his time in the Clone War on the planet, and Rex living in the home of Cutler Quain. As Cody descended onto Seleucami, the former clone was not surprised by the high level of security, but Cody was aware of all of the procedures, and had taken precautions to cover every potential obstacle. Though the planet had suffered from the scars of war, Cody knew exactly where Cut's home was located, but when he approached the field surrounding the LeQuain's home, he found a DC-17 hand blaster between his eyes. Cody had not noticed the sensors on the perimeter fencing, which were added since their previous visit, and Rex glared at Cody, preparing to defend the LeQuains. As he had done in Mon Mothma's office, Cody dropped his weapons and told Rex he was not working for the Empire. With a blaster in his back, Cody is ushered towards the LeQuain's home, where Cut was quicker to welcome Cody. Rex trusted the judgment of Cut, and lowering his blaster from Cody, the most recent deserter revealed his mission to find Obi-Wan Kenobi and help take the fight to the Empire. Rex was wary of jeopardizing the location of the Jedi Master, and returning to his ship, he asked Organa if Cody could join the rebellion. Though the effects of the inhibitor chip were diminishing, Organa asks Rex to leave nothing to chance, and after removing the chip, Cody uses his chain code to get them off of the planet and head to Organa's coordinates. Once Rex and Cody arrived, they rendezvoused at the Tantive IV, and in the corridors of the ship, Cody saluted his old general on opposing ends. Obi-Wan could not sense any ill intentions from Cody and welcomed him to the rebellion and asked him to impart any knowledge that they could use. Cody begins to recall in detail many of the Empire's procedures and other details the rebellion had not been able to access, and the hope which had all but been erased after failing to defeat the Sith was reignited again. The Emperor had not recovered his reputation from his attack on Vader, so much of Cody's inside knowledge was passed on to any pockets of resistance in Imperial territory, and the Empire's rule through fear was now under substantial threat. Vader could only squash one planet at a time, and Obi-Wan knew they had to strike before he completed control over the dark side. The Jedi Master devised an elaborate plan to lure Vader to his old homeworld of Tatooine in what was obviously a trap. Though the Hutt cartel had significant control in the Outer Rim, the remaining separatist hideouts and other economic factors were a massive draw to the Empire. The rebellion took advantage of the Empire's anti-alien policy, with Rex and Cody helping those in Rhodia and Ryloth by providing weaponry to fight back and freeing slaves from their brutal masters. Aboard an Imperial-class Star Destroyer, Will of Tarkin had just completed a check of the progress of Project Stardust when he received an interesting transmission from the Outer Rim. Tarkin was initially annoyed that someone had dared to oppose the Empire, but this was replaced by a sadistic smile, and he knew this as a chance to test Project Celestial power and prove he was superior to Krennic. Allowing for Krennic to take charge of the operation, the Imperial officer was eager to use the crime-ridden Outer Rim to gather resources for the Death Star project, but also to secretly gain the upper hand on the other officers by proving he could stabilize Imperial control in the region. When the rebels discovered the increased Imperial activity, they were surprised that their threat was not sufficient enough to draw Vader, so they decided to spread rumors of a Jedi hiding on Savareen, creating a trail that later led to the nearby Tatooine. They knew that Vader would purposely follow the trap and try to eradicate its source, but this was what the Jedi wanted. Though some of the experimental Kyber weapons had decimated settlements in the surrounding planets, Organa had helped to evacuate as many of the slaves as he could, and eventually Vader activated their trap. Aboard his newly painted Venator-class Star Destroyer, Vader had examined the footage of the supposed Jedi, and though it could be seen deflecting bolts with a lightsaber, something did not seem right to the Sith. Nevertheless, he now felt equipped to deal with such a threat, with his new and increasing powers, and with his fleet hovering above the Tatooine system, Vader descended to the planet in his Actis-class Interceptor. The trail left by the Jedi led Vader to the spaceport of Mos Eisley, and after dismissing the need for extra security, he instead asked for the area to be scanned for a hooded Jedi. Unknown to the Sith, the rebels had positioned spies on top of the walls of the settlement, and had reported Vader's arrival and search out to the Jedi. At the Jedi's hidden base, Obi-Wan prepared himself in his quarters through meditation, and having had time to digest that Anakin had been replaced by Vader, he was ready to eliminate the threat. Against the wishes of Organa, Obi-Wan traversed the journey on foot, using the direction of the twin suns and the Force as his guide, and just as he saw the outline of Mos Eisley in the distance, Vader stood in front of him. The Imperial troopers who had helped the search for the Jedi raised their blasters for an attack, but Vader dismissed them and ignited his new red lightsaber. To Obi-Wan, this helped to erase some of the memories of what Anakin had been, but it also showed that he had failed. There was no time to dwell on such thoughts, as Vader powerfully surged towards him, and he switched to his patented defensive form. Eager to use his new Force powers, Vader used the sand around him to distract Obi-Wan, but the Jedi Master threw his cloak back in response. Obi-Wan appeared to be struggling under Vader's attack, but he was using Vader's pride to his advantage, and he lured him towards their base. Now further away from Mos Eisley, the Master and his former apprentice were evenly matched when they came across a steep valley. Knowing this was where the base was hidden, Obi-Wan surprised Vader by pushing him into the valley, and he told him that Tatooine would be the beginning and now the end. As Obi-Wan deactivated his lightsaber, Vader rushed and jumped towards him from a lower plane, but Obi-Wan used both of his hands to push Vader away. The Sith reacted in mid-air to repel the Force push, and the result was Vader hovering whilst locked in a Force battle. All of a sudden, Vader found himself pulled back to the rebel hideout, and slammed into the back of a Mandalorian vault. If his view was not obscured by the thin window at the top of the vault, Vader would have seen former Jedi Grandmaster Yoda ordering for Vader to be transported to a secure location, and as his yellow eyes now bore through his old master, he also saw his Imperial Star Destroyer. The Jedi had not seen Vader using a secret button on his wrist just before he entered the vault to contact his fleet, and though it damaged his pride, he called upon a rescue. As the Jedi levitated Vader across the base, Organa guided him through a secret entrance at the back, and an excavated passageway led to one of the hangars in Mos Eisley spaceport. Having detonated their base, the rebels blocked any path to the tunnel, and with the Empire searching around the base, this allowed for an escape from Mos Eisley. As Vader was moved to a prison block above Alderaan, the Jedi knew they couldn't celebrate the victory, and that the Emperor would soon return to reclaim his apprentice. But for Organa, the capture of Vader was a massive boost for the growing rebellion, and as word spread of his success, the galaxy was starting to gain hope that the reign of tyranny would end. On the planet of Alderaan, Padme Amidala had heard of the capture of Vader, and she debated whether she should rescue the one formerly known as Anakin. As she looked at her children with Breha Organa, she confirmed what she decided on Mustafar, and Luke and Leia were now a priority, and one day they would restore peace to the galaxy. But for Emperor Palpatine, the capture of his apprentice was an inconvenience. Vader had been overly eager in his mission to eliminate the Jedi, and during his rescue, that task now fell to the Inquisitors. The Emperor had not been oblivious to the descent against the Empire, but it seemed that even the ambitious Krennic was failing to break them. As he sat on top of his throne in the Imperial Palace, he ordered for Tarkin to be summoned, and the Moff soon bowed to him. With a sadistic smile, Palpatine told Tarkin it was time to prioritize Project Stardust.